Chapter 71. Vi brushed back Kyler's hair with gentle fingers. Before them, the ferali had transformed into a troll and was wading through the Cenarian lines. She barely saw it. She was staring at Kyler's dead face. For the first time, she realized how young he looked. Kyler was serene, beatific. Vi had murdered him. She'd delivered immortality to the God King. Something splashed on his cheek. Vi blinked. What the hell? The drop slid down his cheek to his ear. She blinked. Again, more rapidly, refusing to believe she was crying. What had Sister Ariel said? Something about being an emotional cripple? Vi looked at her tear glimmering in Kyler's ear and wiped it away. That bitch called me stupid. And so she was. Her finger froze. It hit Vi like a warhorse at a full gallop. She hadn't escaped Sister Ariel at all. Suddenly Vi couldn't breathe. She saw the sister's trap now, laid out for her in every way Ariel had spoken. She saw the bait and the consequences. It was an escape, but it was escape from the God King. It only required Vi to do something worse to Kyler than anything Hugh Gibbet had ever done to her. She put an unsteady hand into a pouch and found the box right where she'd put it. She opened the box and looked at the Wadener wedding rings tucked inside. If she did this, it would be like rape, and Vi knew rape. Yet it was the only way. Sister Ariel had said Sister Ariel had the Niles plant all the information Vi would need. They told her she needed to show an outward sign of an inward change, to break the compulsion, a transfer of loyalties. They talked of the powerful magic in some of the old rings, how they held a type of compulsion spell, and the bitch witch had dangled the carrot herself, quick advancement, private tutoring, being important. Vi didn't care. She wouldn't do this for herself. She'd do it because if she didn't, the God King would become immortal. Vi would become his pet assassin, a one-woman plague slaying any who dared defy him. She'd do this for those poor bastards getting eaten alive on the battlefield. She'd do this because if she didn't, Kyler would die. Truly die. But he would never forgive her. She ran her fingers through Kyler's hair. His face looked cold and still, judgmental. She would escape. She would change. But Kyler and Elaine would pay the price. The earring pierced her left ear and the hoop melded together seamlessly. The pain made her eyes water, tears streaming down her face. She pierced the other ring through Kyler's ear. A rush of warmth lit her from head to toe. She felt the compulsion shrivel and burst apart. That was nothing compared to the sudden longing she felt. She gasped. In her very skin, her stomach, her spine, she felt Kyler. He was healing, but he was hurt so badly it made her ache. Her fingers tingled where she was touching his face. He was more handsome than ever. She wanted him to know her. She wanted to confess the truth and be forgiven and have him love her back. She wanted him to hold her, to touch her cheek, to run his fingers through her hair, and that thought exploded against everything she'd ever known. Vi pushed Kyler roughly out of her lap and staggered to her feet. The rush of emotions was too much, too intense, too vast to read, yet it didn't feel alien. It didn't feel counterfeit. It felt like her love was being purified, the coal blown on so that it flared up into fire. It left Vi gasping. She could hardly bear to look at Kyler, but she was free. The compulsion was gone. Free of the God King. On the floor, a lone horseman stood in front of the massive troll. Vi took her dagger and staggered toward her father. She grabbed his body and made him stand. She shook him. Father, Father, someone was screaming. Who the hell was screaming that on the battlefield? A moment later, Gareth realized what it must be and brought his consciousness back to the throne room. Logan could wait a few seconds. To hell with him if he didn't want to know Janine was alive. Father, Vi said, can you tell me one thing? She had obviously come to terms with her compulsion because she was touching him. Father, I'm right in the middle of something. Do you mind? Did you make me kill Jarl? Was it compulsion? He smiled. The lie came easily to his lips. No, Molina, you did that yourself. Oh. The single syllable popped like a little bubble from her lips. Gareth grinned and slid back into the ferali. Gareth roared toward the heavens and brought his scythe arm back. Logan rode straight at him until his horse shied. Logan kicked and sawed at the reins, but the horse refused to obey. It turned around in a desperate circle and stumbled on a body. As Gareth swung the enormous scythe at the level to cut Logan in half, one of the mounted witch hunters burst into the clearing and leapt out of his saddle, tackling Logan. The scythe swept through both horses' necks, and the beast went crashing to the earth in twin sprays of blood. Logan rolled away and got to his feet. Beside him, the archer was already drawing an arrow. He shot one of Gareth's eyes and then another. Gareth blinked and new eyes pushed out the old. It didn't matter. Logan was standing, defiant but defenseless. Gareth's next slash would tear the little man in half. Something hot went into his back. Once, twice, 3 times, again and again. He lifted the ferali's hands to its back, wondering what could pierce his thick hide, wondering why his other eyes hadn't seen the attack. But there were no arrows or spears in his back. The ferali was fading, and as Logan charged at him to stick his sword in his belly, Gareth realized it wasn't the ferali that was bleeding. He was. He heard the sound of weeping, and he was back to the throne room. Vi was hugging him against her breast and stabbing him again and again against herself, as if she wished the dagger would go all the way through him into her own heart. Gareth told his limbs to move, but they were empty, slabs of meat. His body was dying, and his vision was going black. He triggered the death spell. It was a terrible risk trying to hurl his consciousness into another body. If Callie granted this, her price would be grievous, but he had nothing to lose. The ver ripped from his arms and engulfed Vi in a forest of black fingers. They pulled her closer. He was close. It was working. He could feel it. And then every finger of ver was sheared off by an iridescent blade passing between Gareth and Vi. The ver, cut from their source, froze, cracked, and evaporated into black smoke. Gareth turned and saw the impossible. Kyler was alive and stood with judgment writ on every feature and a blade of black kari in his fist. Realization swept through Gareth like a tidal wave. The devourer devoured life itself. The sustainer sustained life itself. It was not just extended life or healing, it was true immortality. Gareth had had a chance for real godhood, and he'd let it slip right through his fingers. Impotent rage washed through him. Then Kyler's Kakari blade descended one more time towards his head. Logan rammed his sword into the troll's belly, and the creature rocked back. It dropped to its knees as if it had suddenly lost all coordination. Logan jumped backwards and narrowly avoided being crushed. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but it didn't seem that the troll's reaction was right. Logan had seen it take worse wounds and not even flinch. Both armies' eyes were fixed on Logan and the beast. Logan stabbed it again and a third time, but the wound sealed as soon as the sword pulled out. As it was still on its knees, the plates covering most of the beast's stomach slid out onto its sides, gurgling and grinding like a breaking nose, but repeated 100 times. From the gap between the plates, something pressed out against the skin, bulging and glooping. In another second, the form resolved itself, pushed out from the troll's stomach like a living bas-relief. Was a woman. Her face worked and a mouth appeared. "I can't fight it, King. So hungry. Just like in the hole. I can't stop, King. Look at what they made me. It won't let me kill me, King. So hungry. Like the bread. So hungry." "Lily? I thought it was Gareth," Logan said. "He's gone. Dead. Tell me what to do, King. I can't stop me. I'm so hungry. It's eating myself." Logan realized that even in the time since Gareth Ursel's face had protruded from it, the troll had shrunk. It was devouring itself. It had to do something fast. They couldn't kill it. The beast healed its wounds without even conscious thought, and now the form of Lily was becoming indistinct. "Lily," Logan said. "Lily, listen to me." She rallied, and her form protruded once more, though this time without a mouth. "Lily, eat the Caledonians. Eat them all and run up into the mountains, all right?" But she was gone. The plate snapped back into place, and the troll lumbered to its feet. It fixed its eyes on Logan and raised its scythe. All trace of Lily gone. Logan walked straight toward it. "You wanted to make things right, Lily? You remember, Lily?" Logan asked, hoping that he could draw her back with the sound of her name. "You want to earn your pardon, Lily? Am I your king or not?" The ferali blinked, paused. Logan's voice pitched with an authority he'd never known he had, and pointed at the Caledonians. He shouted, "Go! Kill them! I command it!" The ferali blinked. Then, in a movement faster than any Gareth had ever made in it, it slashed an arm through the Caledonians behind it. Logan turned and saw thousands of pairs of eyes locked on him in disbelief. Logan Geyer, the man who commanded a ferali to stop, and it did. The battle had come to a standstill. Caledonians and Cenarians stood within easy reach of each other and didn't fight. The ferali, easily 30 feet tall now, commanded all attention. It didn't turn, it merely went gelatinous for a moment, and then what had been its front was its back, and it was facing the Caledonians. A fireball arched up from a Meister and ricocheted off its skin harmlessly. 10 more followed and did nothing. Lightning hit an instant later and barely left a black mark on its skin. The ferali crouched and flexed every muscle in its body. All the arms and armor that Gareth had incorporated in the beast exploded from its body in all directions. Breastplates and mail shirts and spears and swords and warhammers and daggers and hundreds of arrows rattled to the ground in a great circle. A glowing white homunculus streaked out of the Caledonian lines and stuck to the ferali. In a line between the Verdmeister and the homunculus, the air seemed to distort, as if anything viewed through it would be seen in a bent mirror. The air bubbled in a streak toward the ferali. 10 paces from the ferali, the distortion in the air ripped open with red fire. The pitworm struck, but its lamprey mouth closed on nothing. The ferali was unbelievably fast. The pitworm twisted, black and red, fiery skin lurching further into reality, 40 feet, 60, with no sign of its body tapering. Logan heard weapons rattle to the ground, drop from nerveless fingers as the Titans warred. But the battle lasted only 1 strike more. The pitworm had missed again, and the ferali didn't. An enormous fist crushed the worm's head and snapped its body like a whip onto the Caledonian lines beneath it. It broke apart in bloodless black and red clumps that sizzled on the ground like water drops on a hot skillet, hissing into green smoke and disappearing. The ferali turned to the Caledonian lines, and a dozen arms sprang from its body. It began snatching up soldiers like a greedy child snatching sweetmeats. Then men on both sides remembered the battle. The Cenarians remembered their weapons, and the Caledonians remembered their heels. They cast away weapons and shields to run faster. A shout went up as the Caledonians around the ferali broke. Logan couldn't believe it. The impossibility of it was too much to accept. "Who do you want to go after?" General Aegon asked. He and a bloody Duke Westeros had appeared out of nowhere. "No one," Logan said. "She can't tell friend from foe. Our fighting's done." "She?" Duke Westeros asked. "Don't ask." Aegon rode off shouting orders, and Logan turned to the man who'd tackled him from the horse. He didn't recognize him. "You saved my life. Who are you?" Logan asked. The Sethi woman who'd been stuck to his side for the entire battle, Caladrosa Wynn, stepped up. "My lord, this is my husband, Tommen," she said, fiercely proud. "You're a brave man, Tommen, and no mean shot. What boon would you ask?" Tommen looked up, and inexplicably his eyes shone. "You already gave me back more than I deserve. You gave me back my love, my lord. What's more precious than that?" He extended his hand, and his wife took it. The Cenarian ranks reformed in the tightest square the generals could manage, and just watched as the Caledonians were massacred. There was no retreat. It was a rout. The rest of the circle broke, men running in every direction. The ferali tore through them. It became a snake and rolled over whole sections of the line, men sticking to its body, screaming. Then it was a dragon. Always it had dozens of hands. Always it was quick and terrible. Piteous screams rose on every side, and men tore at each other in their panic. Some crouched behind the sheep fences, some huddled in the lee of boulders, some climbed trees at the edge of the field. But the creature was meticulous in its savagery. It picked up men everywhere, whether alive or dead or wounded or feigning death or hiding or fighting, and devoured them. Not all the Caledonians fled. Some turned and fought. Some rallied their fellows and attacked with more courage than the Cenarians would have believed possible. Perhaps more courage than they would have shown themselves. But in the face of that horror, courage was irrelevant. The brave and the cowardly, the high and the low, the good and the bad, died alike. And the Cenarians watched, open-mouthed, not one forgetting that the massacre should have been their own. The few times that a Cenarian here or there cheered, no one took up the cry. The ferali tore this way and that, not catching every group of Caledonians, but getting most of them, and always, always veering far from the Cenarian ranks, as if it feared the temptation of going too near them. Finally, having devoured the last group large enough to be worth its time, the ferali fled toward the mountains. Cenaria was either blessed or lucky, or Lily was in better control than Logan had hoped, because it headed in a direction where there were no villages for 100 miles. In the silence, someone let out a whoop. For a moment it hung alone in the air. Logan had been given a new horse and mounted. He turned and was again aware of thousands of eyes on him. Why were they all looking at him? Then someone cheered again, and the thought wormed its way into Logan's consciousness. They had won. Somehow, against everything, they had won. For the first time in months, Logan felt his mouth curl into a grin, then let loose a flood, and suddenly no one could stop smiling or stop yelling or stop pounding each other on the back. Which noble flag they had fought under no longer mattered. Aegon's dogs embraced Cenaria's city levies, former thieves and former guards standing together as friends. Nobles stood arm in arm with peasants, shouting together. The shattered links binding the country together seemed to be reforming, even as Logan looked over the tight-packed army. They had won. The costs had been grievous, but they had stood against the might of a monster and the magic of a god, and they had won. A cry began to emerge over the sound of swords and spears pounding rhythmically against shields. "What are they saying?" Logan shouted to Aegon. But even as he asked, Logan made out the words, shouted in time with each crash of sword on shield. "King Gyre, King Gyre, King Gyre." It was audacious. It was treasonous. It was beautiful. Logan looked through the throng for Tara Grayson. She was nowhere to be found. And then he did smile.